It's been interesting as we've been planning this summit that
Yeah.
I've been probably the more experienced one, and I have
3 years.
I have like 2 years of experience, and it's like, oh, he's the most knowledgeable. But he knows the history. And I'm like, I knew like 2 years of it. I guess.
I'm John Stevens, and this is Pod Have Mercy. This is Pod Have Mercy.
Well, I want to welcome y'all to Pod Have Mercy today. We've got some really guests that I love and have grown to love over my time at Chapelwood. And why don't y'all just introduce yourselves and tell us just a little about yourselves, and we'll jump into what we're doing today.
Yeah, my name is Joseph Patty. I've been here just about a year as the Director of Student Ministry and causing a lot of trouble, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's great. It was a year ago that we did this podcast, and you had just, like, you
my
were
second
in
day.
country, like, the born on date was like super fresh.
Yeah, I met 150 students the day before.
That's
so
right. Yeah, I remember that.
for the first time, that was fun.
That was a great week.
Yeah. I'm Evan Nehring. I'm the Associate Director of Serving Ministries. I actually just completed my third year here at Chapelwood, and second year kind of helping with sites at Summit. So
it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And Evan, you're getting married like within the next 30 days.
Well, 3 weeks and a couple days. Yeah. So
It's amazing.
A lot of stuff to think through.
Congratulations. Yeah. Well, we're in Lake Charles, Louisiana at Summit this week. And if the stats are right, we've brought 150 kids from across
Pretty
Houston, with 50 adult kind of volunteers as well.
Yeah, we got just shy of 200 people with us. So
Great. Can you guys kind of tell us about Summit, maybe some of the history and what its purpose is, and what we're doing here this week?
yeah. Evan, I'll let you speak to the history of it.
Yeah, it's been interesting as we've been planning this summit that I've been probably the more experienced one, and I have
3 years.
I have like 2 years of experience, and it's like, oh, he's the most knowledgeable. But he knows the history. And I'm like, I knew like 2 years of it. I guess.
You know what we did in COVID.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, that's true. So, I mean, history-wise,
That's right.
Yeah.
2 years of COVID,
yeah,
and you
exactly.
are
the most experienced. Yeah,
That's great.
So, history-wise, I mean, Summit's been going on for a while now. I mean,
Decades, right?
Decades. I want to say 20 years, but I could be off on that number. But it started off as just, back with Joseph Clam and just going on mission, and it's evolved into what it is today. And
they kind of outgrew a lot of the Army stuff, and at some point, you're so big, you just got to figure out how to do it on your own, and so we did it, and it's kind of just like morphed into its own thing, where it is this mission trip that we do all the legwork from top to bottom on, and we partner with local community resources and churches, and come alongside, and the aim is to come alongside what God is already doing in a community, instead of like, oh, here we are, Chapelwood, to come save the day.
Yeah.
And so, we're leaning into what SWLA Responds is doing, and they're kind of a staple in the community, and their whole mission is to empower the local church to do recovery work and to repair from all the hurricanes that have hit Lake Charles over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and I think Joseph really hit on a good point, and real hard, I would say, of Summit is that, like, especially whenever they got away from UR Army and said, hey, we're gonna start kind of putting it together ourselves and planning it from top to bottom. They didn't want to. Summit never wanted to be a thing where we come into a community, do a bunch of work, and then leave. And I think realizing that there can be harm with short-term missions like that, but it became let's partner with local organizations, like wherever we're going, whether it's we're in Lake Charles this year partnering with SWLA, or last year whenever we're in Waco partnering with Grassroots. There's always a local organization component there, so that these houses, I mean, the reality of it is these people need a lot more work and a lot more help than just we can provide in 4 days, right? So the fact that they're connected, and that work's going to continue once we leave.
Yeah.
And I think that feeds into what you're saying too about, like, hey, it's not like we're anything special. It's not like we're here these like saviors to save people here. We're here to jump in and help. We come in with open arms saying, hey, what do y'all need? We're not here to tell y'all what y'all need. We're here to ask y'all what y'all need and serve y'all in that way.
So it feels like what we're doing is picking up a part of the baton and running our days with it, and then it's going to be passed on to another group that will show up. And so that's the thing that I love about it, is that we will never see the completed work, but we know that somebody's behind us, somebody's been before us, and we're trying to be as faithful as we can in this leg of the journey.
Yeah, and particularly this year, where there's we're sandwiched between two other actually fairly large groups, and just trying to prepare our students' hearts for hey, we're hanging the sheetrock on the wall, but somebody did the mucking last week and somebody else is going to do the mudding next week. This is the larger church coming together.
That's great.
Which is cool.
Yeah, and it is really interesting, and it's a real hard mental piece, and I don't think it should be overlooked. Of there is something to say, it's whenever you're coming in volunteering, you do want to see a project through, and it's hard to either start a project and not finish it, or not be the one to start it. And so I think the students have done a really I've been blown away by their mindset and heart walking in, and being so open to serving, because that's a hard thing, and it's a hard thing to not kind of get, obviously it's not about ourselves, but we have very egotistical natures as humans, so it's hard for us not to make it about ourselves at times. And so to be able to lay down that part of ourselves and say, hey, I would love to see this finish, I'd love to finish with my own hands, but that's not that's going to happen, but I'm here to jump in where I can and help where it's needed. It's been really cool to see the students really take that on this week.
Yeah. So, I mean, having 150 kids that descends on, and so there's a local church that opens basically its doors for 5 days and just says,
here you go,
take it over.
Yeah.
And like you had said before we had started the recording, I mean, it's just been inundated with our crew.
Yeah. I can't imagine being in the mind of the pastor of this church, watching ants just cover the space, and do what we will, and particularly the way the guys' sleeping habits and just their stuff slowly spreads and creeps across the floor.
It's a refugee center, and at least where the dudes are. Yeah. I'm just this is horrible. It's just horrible.
There's a very strong
it smells like
mildew.
It just smells like feet.
Scent
whenever adolescent kids into space, it's just dear Lord.
It's a damp room right now.
Yeah.
There's no way around it.
So what have y'all been seeing in terms of just the community of Lake Charles? I mean, we've talked a little about the devastation. I've been really shocked. Jeff and I talked about this a bit yesterday, just as we were driving around. There's still, 2 years on, there's still blue tarps on. I'm this is not a statistical analysis, but it seems like 50% of the roofs
everywhere. Everywhere you go, you see it.
Blue tarps are still on the roofs.
Yeah.
And they're still just, houses that are falling apart. And
and Evan's had more conversations with some of our clients than I have, but you get the feeling of, they've had just one after another disaster, and it was 3 years ago there was the one hurricane, and they rallied and they started to rebuild, and then 2 more hurricanes came in 1 year, and it's it just deflates all of your motivation to keep going. And so there are some that have rebuilt, but there's a lot of people that's man, what's the point? It's just going to happen again. And so, there's only so much we can do. Braylon, the main guy in SWLA, he has this golden quote of, it feels like pouring Kool-Aid in the ocean, of what you're doing. It's good work, but there's just so much.
Yeah.
And so, even if what we're doing can just give a little hope, and fill up their emotional bucket, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would put it as the analogy of I'm sure we've all been there, where you have your room, and maybe your room gets a little dirty, and it's very dirty, and it becomes almost overwhelming to where you're I need to do something, but it's almost too overwhelming to ever start.
Yeah, then they have to call in that hoarders, crew, and they film you, and that's lift you up out of your house with a crane. But it's exactly like that.
But that's almost what this community is kind of in a mental state of it's too overwhelming. Yeah. We don't know, like, where do you even start? Like, whenever every single roof in this place, I mean, the schools that year, I was talking to one of the principals, and she was explaining how, COVID happened. They didn't come back to school after spring break. Over the summer, her and all the teachers are planning about safety and, social distancing, masks, gloves. Like, how are we going to get these kids back in school? Had this great game plan. And, like, literally that week before school was supposed to start, they had everything in order. We're super excited for students to come back in the building. That weekend, Laura hits.
Oh.
They don't have their first day of school until October 19th.
That's 2 months after.
2 months later. And you're dealing with COVID on top of all that. Like, so not only are kids coming back to buildings that are probably not safe to be in, but they're still having to social distance. They're still having to do all, I mean, it's overwhelming. It's just like, where do you start?
Yeah.
And then you add in the aspect of, with every natural disaster, with storms and stuff like that, a lot of contractor fraud that comes into this area, people rolling in, them getting their insurance money, them paying a contractor. They either start the work or they just ditch town and with their money. And so the money they did have to rebuild is now gone. The school district here actually came out with a report this past week that $1.5 million was stolen from them in contractor fraud from these past storms. And so, like, in a school district where money isn't flowing to begin with, you're now even more in the hole, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can just, again, it's just this overwhelmingness that you talk to these people, and it's just like, and that's why, I told the students, like, you're sitting there painting a wall in a school, but, like, it means so much more to them than just a wall painted.
Right.
Like, it's a sign that life will move on and that they can get out of this, that it's not just the end of the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you got your home and your school are in shambles, right? Or even if your home is repaired, your neighbor, and, like, everywhere you go, you see it.
Yes.
So if we can create just one space of peace, right? That'll be something that's felt.
So I find this to be super interesting, and so there's the external things that are happening within Lake Charles and the work that our church is involved in kind of being faithful in those spaces, and then there's another dynamic of the students that have come. And we have a speaker at night, and there's a worship, and there's things that happen. And it's really a time also on these work crews for kids to get honest with some things that are happening, or looking at some things that are happening in their own lives, and have 3 or 4 unabated days just to begin to build relationships with adults that they trust. And I've been amazed at what some of these kids are sharing, of these kids are. Could you attend to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've only gotten to sit in on a handful of their lunchtime conversations where, we'll just have them read a couple of verses from Psalm 57, and then just a couple of questions of, I sat in on one yesterday where it's essentially David crying out to God and saying, like, I'm going to be steadfast, but awake my soul. And so just, like, having them process, like, okay, so David is being hunted by people and his life is in absolute chaos. Have you experienced chaos in your life in this week? And then students just start sharing, and they start sharing, like, oh, well, this is how I experience and how I express chaos. And, well, how do I get out of that? And so then just starting to understand this need for awakening. And I've walked in on, like, several leaders, like, actually, as they're sharing in these lunch devotions, like, the leaders are, like, weeping, like, as they're sharing their own hearts, because they care so deeply and passionately. And so for students to see that, right? And then that leads into, last night we had some just extended prayer time. And you look out, and, sometimes you have the prayer time where it's like they only go and pray with, like, the staff or whatever, but you look out and it's students praying with each other, and it's the adult leaders seeking out the students and praying with them and over them. And I don't know, it just felt like a picture of what church should be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it really is just a deepening of the spiritual side while we're also walking out.
Yeah.
Kind of a small expression of how we should be living on a day-to-day basis.
I've been amazed just to watch that dynamic you're talking about this week, because I think I've realized, and I've heard, we've all heard this, that the last 2 years, particularly for adolescents, has been really rough and really difficult. And so coming to a place where there is devastation all around and they're giving themselves to that seems to be something that's really helpful. But then also to have space spiritually to understand that there's also a devastation that's happened internally for them, and to have other people attend to that space. I'm just watching this kind of spiritual and emotional healing take place. And so it's a super tender, it's a tough week and a tender week. And I've loved being a part of it and watching you guys work in it as well. So
it's been really good. We shared last night just that Lo, our speaker, shared last night, that we are called to lean into the brokenness of culture, to recognize it for what it is, not participate in it, but lean into it and plant gardens in the midst of thorns and thistles. And part of how we do that is as we seek out our own healing in Christ and become more whole in Him and holy in Him, then that actually in turn becomes seeds that we can plant into the culture around us, right? And so giving them that space actually allows them and prepares them to go back and live missionally, which is really, for me, that's a big piece of what this trip is about. For students it's really easy to say like, oh, I checked off my box if I did my mission trip and I can pat myself on the back. But the calling is, no, like this, it's for whatever reason, when you leave home, it's easier to sweat really hard and to serve other people and to put others' needs first. But if this can be a training ground for how we live on a day-to-day basis,
that's good.
And to continually seek out healing and praying with each other and doing the deep work as well as the putting others' needs before your own work.
That's right.
Yeah, I think, I just think this is why I love missions in general.
You do love missions.
I really do. They've been very impactful in my own life, and I think the reason for that, and I talk to a lot of people about this, is it's such a two-way street. Like, the vehicle is the service we're coming to do, but that we're here to serve and love, but you're getting just as much out of it for yourself. And I think for me, something I always reflect on is, one, you're tired. Usually whenever you're on mission you're just naturally breaking down these walls and these barriers. You get tired. You get
to the end of yourself.
You get to the end of yourself and you look at yourself and you're like, okay, I don't have any more to give. So I have to turn to God in a way that I probably physically I have to turn to God. Man, I've got to wake up at 6 a.m. and I've only gotten 4 hours of sleep the past 3 nights, and I've got to go work a full day. And so there's that aspect. But I also think for these students and people, you look around and there's almost like a self-reflection, at least that I've seen and I've talked to people about, that we're broken in of ourselves. And so whenever you're working on projects that are physically broken and you can see and you're helping restore them, there's a mental nugget of you're also being restored here through this work, right? And I think we can see ourselves as overwhelming and not knowing where to start in our own problems and our own chaos, and so it's really cool to whenever you can physically see an example of, okay, if we can get this project done here on this mission, that means I can work on myself as well, and I can, and like what you're saying, take that home with you, and apply that.
That's really great. What are you hoping is the long-term effect of trips like these on the lives of students and the adults that come along?
For me, a lot of what we're doing in student ministry is trying to build culture, and building a kingdom culture, and so. When we take ourselves out of our normal rhythms, it's the breakdown of the culture that we know is accelerated. And you begin to cast a vision, so to speak, of hey, this is another way that life could look, and to just give a picture of that. because I would love, someday down the road, like, man, we didn't have to go on mission trips, but like, this is just who we are. You know what I mean? And I think that this mission trip does embody a lot of what our church is passionate about already. But it's inviting people into a new reality, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. I think some of that reality that I'm seeing is the relationships that are happening that kind of cross boundaries and barriers. So you have kids from different schools, you have kids that don't know each other, you have adults that are kind of thrown into the mix, and so you've got this kind of sweat equity that's happening during the day, and then in the evening, or even on the sites, just watching, as I said earlier, these relationships begin to form and trust quite quickly, and I think leveraging that into the future for kids' lives of having adults that they can trust and kind of be able to share the things that maybe they're afraid to share is really an antidote to that culture of isolation that's so prevalent.
Well, there's a story I got to tell real quick that I heard this morning from a work team adult, that last night, everyone on his team is different grades, and none of them have, just like what you're saying, don't really interact, have never really known each other, interacted with each other beforehand. And he saw last night they were all with their friends, but as the night went on, they all began to found each other as a work team and began to pray. And they came up to him and were like, "Can you pray with us too?" And like, I'm like, how neat is that? That like these people who would never would have ever talked to each other outside of this environment, and like just like their God guidance was put together, and have this just moment where they're like, let's like, yeah, we're sweating together, and so I trust you. Like, let's sit down and like be real with each other. And so I heard that this morning. I was like, that's like, that's what this is about. Is moments like that.
Yeah. So then the hope is like the Breakfast Club, like after detention is done. Will you still say hi to me in the hallways,
they hang
right?
Together. Yeah. Will they ever see each other again? Right? That's the deal.
Yeah, that's the hope, right?
That's really
and another piece of that too that became really prevalent to me, on one of the nights, we just had this prayer station where we were seeing the thorns and thistles, so to speak, the brokenness in our own lives and the lies that have been spoken over us and that we're believing. And then on the other side, is one mirror that you write the lies and another mirror that you can write God's truth. And I was reading through them, and
so just to set the stage, it was really a station after the worship and the speaker that there was mirrors. 2 mirrors that were placed out really kind of in 4 or 5 different stations like that. And one of the stations, you stood in front of the mirror and you wrote the lies that you had kind of ingested. Whatever those lies were that you realized that had become a truth in you. And then the next mirror, you wrote the truth about who God says you are. Is that okay?
Yeah. And the number of repeats that I saw of I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm alone, I'm not enough. Like, all these students have like this incredibly deep struggle of isolation and shame. And so, we challenge them, like, go look at it and pray over it, but see, like, you're not the only one struggling with this. You're not alone in it. And if we can open our eyes to it, like, we all struggle with shame. And A, Jesus bears that on the cross, and B, he gives us his body that we can come together. And if we would just be vulnerable and say, like, yeah, I struggle with that too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that even transcends the students. Myself, other adults were up there writing, going up to the lies as well and writing stuff down and writing down truths. And it's that connectional piece of like, hey, we're all in this together. Like, you don't all of a sudden overcome this when you turn a certain age and you have a job. Like, these are stuff that you're going to be combating your whole life.
Yeah. Even our staff. Yeah. It's like, man, I'm struggling with inadequacy this week.
Right.
You know what I mean? And Jesus is like, I got you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I love about kind of mission trips, and had been formed in my own kind of past with these kind of things as an adolescent, as a kid, kind of growing up in church, is that they, like you said, they get you out of your rhythm, right? They get you out of a way of kind of thinking and being, and they disorient you, because you're thrown into, a sweat lodge with a bunch of dudes, that just gets worse over time. And you're working all day, and then there's these things that happen in the evening with these relationships that really have the tendency to open you up more. And so I think it's genius what happens in spaces like this, because we begin to see that we're, like you had said, we're not alone. Yeah. Like each of us are carrying burdens that have to do with shame or isolation or not enoughness, right? That those are energies that really shape us. And then to have a community that offers a counter narrative, that says, actually, this is who love says you are in God,
Yeah.
It's freaking beautiful.
These are weeks where I'm like, this is what community in the Bible looks like. Like I wish, there's part of me that's like, I wish this is what life looked like every day back home in Houston, but there's part of me that doesn't, because I'm glad I get to go home to a bed and other things.
You haven't been sleeping next to the 9th grade boys, I'm just gonna say.
That might be it.
But heaven becomes hell pretty quick.
Yes, but like the aspects of serving together, of just doing life together in the fullest, of like having the really high highs together, having the really low lows, sweating together, eating together, worshiping together, like that, man, that's what community is. And that's what, it's these weeks that you realize, oh, I was designed to enjoy this, like, and I think that there's a lot of adults and students who both kind of walk away being like that's what they're reminded of this week.
Yeah. The other thing I think too, that it allows us to see a city differently, so that one of my hopes is that these kids see like a type of city that's kind of absorbed a lot of trauma. And as we go back to Houston, there are parts of our city that have absorbed a lot of trauma, right? That we are less than 5 miles from. And so the question is always, or the work for me is always, how do we connect those dots? How do we continue to build relationships across divides to where we don't have to only come to Waco or Lake Charles or wherever these things are happening, but to say, oh, these things are happening in my own city, maybe even in my own school, right? Maybe in my own neighborhood. And how do we bridge those divides?
Happening to the person right next to you, right? Maybe even the person in your own house, that's with you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Great. Well, guys, thanks so much for coming and hanging out and talking, and also just for your leadership. I've just watching y'all work and move in the world has been just such a gift to me, and it's such a blessing to know you and to be sharpened by you, and just appreciate you so much.
Thankful for you too, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm Matt Russell.
I'm Joseph Patty.
I'm Evan Nehring.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
Hello, neighbor, how are you? Really wanna shower you with love.